we have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
Good evening, folks. You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper.
Is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
Time, weather, and
Veteran of 3 foreign wars, entrepreneur, and warrior poet, Tony Arterburn takes on the issues facing our country, civilization, and planet. This is the Arterburn radio transmission.
Wait before my coffee, the intro. That is the order of things. Welcome to the Arterburn radio transmission, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Tony Arterburn. I'm broadcasting in defiance of globalist goblins, the neocons, and the New World Order, live from the Wolfpack.gold studios in beautiful Branson, Missouri. I'm joined by my co-pilot and co-host, Beans the Brave. She's here to protect us, keep us safe from woodland creatures, intruders, and bad vibes. It is the 2nd of October, 2025. Thanks for being here. My support group, talking to Worldwide Christian Radio, WWCR, around the globe, and all the technocratic platforms that I'm still on for right now. Can you believe I'm on YouTube? You can find me at Tony Arterburn on YouTube. So do that while it lasts. And I'm on X at Tony Arterburn and the America Unplugged channel over on Rumble. So go check that out as well. I'm working on some things. I'm going to do a rebranding soon. It's going to be a lot of fun. I've got some plans in mind. Sometime after November or in November somewhere, I'm going to do some upgrades to the show, but I'm glad you're here. It's the official broadcast of the apocalypse. We're going to go through some headlines, and things are happening faster than I had anticipated. I guess the old adage that Hemingway wrote about how a rich man went broke. He said gradually, then suddenly. I think that's holding true today. I'm looking at the headlines for the monetary system, which is my wheelhouse. It's parapolitics and precious metals, folks. But that's the big story. And as a matter of fact, I'm not the only one who thinks that. I was on Activist Post searching for some articles for today's show, and I came across something that my friend Charlie Robinson had posted to Activist Post by Greg Reese. And I'm going to play the clip here towards the end of the show, or maybe about halfway through, depending on what articles we can get through. But it was really, I think, apropos for the moment. It's going to follow something else we're going to talk about today, not only the monetary issues, but the cultural issues. I see a geopolitical shift happening. And I think it's important for you to pay attention to that. Now, not just about the money stuff, but I'm talking about the cultural shifts that are happening that will certainly guide the outcomes of a lot of things that we've taken for granted in our foreign policy and other realms that will no longer be the same, even though they love to keep you in that psyop. They love to keep you captured by the fulcrum of that mind war. But things are changing because of the younger generations. And I want to read, and there's an article on Natural News I want to get into today. But let's cover some financial stuff first. Let's do that. Let's jump into some financial stuff, because this really is happening faster than any other time in our history when it comes to the dollar and when it comes to fiat currency, all of that changing so rapidly. You really can't compare it to anything else. As a matter of fact, I was on with David Knight this morning, and on live on the interview, someone asked about the silver to gold ratio and where it should be. And I said, well, it should be about 10 to 1, 10 to 1 or 20 to 1, somewhere in there. And I said the United States was founded on a 16 to 1 silver ratio, and that held that until 1933, and then things got skewed because Franklin Roosevelt did this big financial heist, had you turn the gold in, and they reevaluated from $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce. And I said all that history, and then we started talking about the 70s. We went off the gold standard in 71, and then by the end of 79, gold's $800 an ounce. And we were talking about the gold silver ratio, and I said I think that the 70s really showed us there was a period there, this brief interlude, where the price of metals reflected the actual ratios and what value was. And I did the calculations on air, just had my phone calculator, and the price of silver in 1980 compared to the price of gold was 16 to 1. So it was exactly what I thought. And I never put those comparisons together. And now we're seeing the revaluation take place. And I think it's a really, really epical, historic time, folks. Let me put this up on the screen, by the way. I forgot to do that. I am my own producer, so bear with me. Let's stop that screen, put this screen up. We're going to go to Kitco. I thought this was a good article. Gold is not just monetary metal. It's a force of nature, says Robert Gottlieb. Sorry, Robert. I didn't mean to mispronounce the name there. Gold's fresh rally to an all-time high above $3,800 continues to prove that this bull run has no equal in recent history, and that the precious metal itself has become a force of nature, according to one market analyst. In an interview with Kitco, Robert Gottlieb, an independent precious metals industry expert and former managing director of the precious metals desk at J.P. Morgan and HSBC, said that he isn't attempting to guess how high gold might go, even as many banks and analysts have set a target at $4,000 an ounce. However, he added that he does see this rally lasting for at least 3 years, as long as President Donald Trump's policies dominate the U.S. economy. Yeah, and I think we're even past the point of policies that we're talking about a reset of the financial system, folks. And I think he's getting that. It's not even just about policies anymore. Gold just continues to do what it does. Raise interest rates, gold goes up. Lower interest rates, gold goes up. Anything that's happening right now with market conditions that used to sway this thing one way or other in a big way are no longer happening. Gottlieb added that he does not want to debate whether Trump's policies are good or bad, but he said there are signs that are creating geopolitical and economic uncertainty, which in turn is fueling demand for gold. Well, that's the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's the FUD, folks, the Fed and the FUD. Gottlieb added this trend started in 2022 when the U.S. government under President Joe Biden weaponized the U.S. dollar against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. However, the diversification trend has intensified in the last few months under Trump as nations, including important allies, navigate rising volatility surging through financial markets due to the global trade war and elevated import tariffs. He added that the world has become a lot more fractured as deglobalization trends intensify. Yeah, I mean, we lost India. How do you do that? We're driving, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then now expanding into all these periphery nations. It's about, just that standard set alone is about 40% of the world's population. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that they huddle together while we become more isolated. It says gold is a completely different asset because of the global geopolitical and economic uncertainty around the world. Countries are starting to tell themselves hey, we need to diversify away from the dollar. And they're diversifying away from the dollar because of the end of globalization. They are diversifying into gold because it's not fiat currency and it's not the credit and faith of any specific country. Well, that's very important because money is trust. Financial markets are built on trust. That's why when you have an economy in shambles, or you see a third world country with a currency implosion, it's because trust somewhere along the way, property rights, something wasn't equitable and trust diminished. And then that starts to collapse under its own weight. And that's why gold always re-enters the fray. Along with general economic uncertainty, there's also a growing lack of faith in the U.S. dollar and U.S. treasuries as the White House tries to put political pressure on the Federal Reserve to aggressively lower interest rates. Well, we've talked about this. I mean, they want a weaker dollar. That is the stated goal. And, let's turn on the money printer, go burr. And when you do that, and that's why it's so insidious too. If you read the history behind this and why, even going back to the 17th century, early 18th century, you look at the John Law experiment with what France did and the first real, fiat currency issued in our era, in the last few hundred years, when they issued it, and how it just expanded. Everything seemed great for a little while, and those closest to it that were issuing the notes got to buy the goods and services and the commodities at the old pricing. Meanwhile, there's this massive increase in the money supply. So increase in the money supply, increase in prices, and the wage earner, the average person, the person who's just trying to work and keep food on the table, that's who gets hit the most. And so all of these things with a weaker dollar, it looks good on paper to a lot of the Wall Street analysts, but make no mistake about it, it's theft. It's pure theft and evil, by the way, because a lot of these institutions and things that would never be around, never would have lasted this long, except for their proximity to the counterfeit machine, to the machine that issues all of the fake notes and fake money. And they get to buy up all the things that are priced in today's prices. Meanwhile, there's a shock that happens. There's this delayed reaction, and then the prices increase. And that's what we're seeing now. That's why the economy is not healthy, because of those liquidity injections. Gottlieb told Kitco that this environment, central banks will continue to buy gold even at elevated and record high prices. He noted that this unprecedented rally, gold has surpassed the euro to become the second largest asset held by central banks. I've talked about that for a long time. And he says the euro is the third biggest holding among European central banks. If that doesn't scream buy gold, then nothing does. He said that's what I've been saying, is that once you see those metrics, this goes back to 2021 when the Bank of International Settlements moved gold from a tier 3 asset to a tier 1, which is currency, and then eventually it just surpassed the euro. So gold's number 2, held by central banks for stability and for their balance sheets. Number 1 is the dollar. Now, how fast do you think that's eroding? In his 30-year career, Gottlieb has worked with many central banks, helping them build their gold reserves. Gottlieb's insights come as he prepares to launch a book, Mastering Gold and Silver Markets, Insights from a Legendary Bullion Bank Trader, which is available for pre-order on Amazon. So go buy his book. I'm going to buy it. Things are certainly different today than they have been at any time in the past. I mean, I mentioned the 1970s, and there was this lull. If you like the history of the monetary system like I do, or pricing, there's this lull from 1980 to about 2008 where central banks just didn't buy gold, and they'd stamp the price down, they'd manipulated it to keep it. I've interviewed Stuart Engler, who's been on my show, and he wrote the book called Rigged about the gold markets. And this was done on purpose, because when you show the price of gold, if the gold continues to rise as in juxtaposition to the dollar. And you can look at this as a metric. The dollar's lost 45% of its purchasing power against gold in the last year. So, treasuries aren't looking so good. The regular, your savings account and feed the pig isn't looking so good. CDs aren't looking so good. Lost 45% of its purchasing power. So that's a real war. I mean, they had to keep the price of gold down, and they did. They did for a long time, and silver stayed nothing forever. And it baffled people, and the silver and gold bugs, and baffled people like, why? How can they get away? Well, they got away with it for a long time. They got away with it for many, many, many years. But eventually, mathematics kicks in. And when I say, from 1980 to about 2009, there was almost 0% purchasing of gold by central banks. And then you just see that metric take off, because that was the key indicator. That was the watershed moment, the GFC, the great financial crisis, 2008, 2009. And things aren't going back the way that they were. I think a lot of people think that these are bubbles, or that these pricing is about a healthy economy, or there's some, rally and go. I don't believe that. I mean, you may have some slight pullback in pricing, but we're way past that. This is the true remonetization of the gold era. It's happening right now. It's the last gold rush ever. So far, emerging market central banks have been the most active participants in gold, but Gottlieb said that he thinks it's only a matter of time before developed economy central banks start to buy. He added that along with the price, time is also irrelevant for central banks. One central bank told me that it takes 10 years for a decision on gold to be made, he said. Meanwhile, Gottlieb said that China could be an important catalyst to drive developed markets central banks into the marketplace. And he's talking about smaller central banks. China has played a dominant role in gold for the last 3 years, but its reserves now only represent about 7% of total foreign reserves. Well, this is an important time, folks. I mean, I read, regardless of what happens with central banks, okay? I read today that the analysts over at Goldman Sachs were just looking at private held treasuries, just U.S. treasuries. And their analysts are like, look, if just 1% of private holders, just don't mention governments, but if 1% of private U.S. treasury holders just flipped into gold, then the price would automatically surpass $5,000 an ounce. And then you have J.P. Morgan's intel saying, well, we think $6,000 an ounce gold before the end of the decade, somewhere around 2029. But that's all speculation. But it's based off of the metrics today, which are perceived value and, an AI rally, or different stocks, or gross domestic product, or the consumer price index, and all of that stuff that they throw out there as these metrics of economic health. So it's all based off today. So we don't even, one day it may become irrelevant how gold is priced. But this is an interesting thing to watch. All right, let's jump around a little bit. Oh, I saw this too. I wanted to bring this up. It's just a little blurb, but something interesting to watch. Let me X out of this screen and bring you another article that I found over on Zero Hedge. One second. Melissa did remind me today to turn my phone off, and I silenced it, but it's still going off. It's a lot of fun. Let's see. Let's put this up. This is Zero Hedge. Interesting title. Sexy silver surges as AI needs shine. Silver continues marching higher. These notes we're approaching 2011 highs. And it shows silver trying that upper trend line. This is charts and graphs showing the 200-day silver trading. but it has a lot to do. And then, of course, silver miners and silver volatility. Silver volatility has been more reactive to the upside compared to gold volatility, but remains below the highs we saw earlier this year. Chasing the underlying here is starting to look like a slightly late trade. But this is what they're showing in this metric is the AI connection. It says you need silver to run AI. Looks like silver is discounting an even bigger AI bull. Something about that, and it's the first time I've seen a headline that said that. Something to pay attention to, and in this monetary revolution, folks. All right. Well, I'll go to the chat really quick. Let's check on the chat. It's been a minute. I'll check on the chat, and then I'm going to go to an article that's up on a Natural News. And I want to end talking about something that's on antiwar.com. All right, let's go to the chat. I'm interested to see what people are saying. I'm getting so many calls right now. Interesting. Karen Carpenter says, hey, Tony and Beans. Well, hey, Karen, it's good to see you. And I want to make sure I shout everybody out. Let's see. Harp says, I'm now officially stalking Tony on 3 platforms. You're a good man. Appreciate that. Stalk me all you want. You'll be the only one. Kenny F. and Power says, hi, Tony and Beans, the brave. Gold and silver having another great week. Pull back today, but on the way to be more record highs, no doubt. Oh, yeah. We're going to see some record highs. It's going to continue to go out there. It's just a matter of time. I think we're really close to silver's all-time high. That's 45 years in the making. I'll check over on the live chat over on Rumble. Good to see you guys. Oh, I see Brandon Bennett's over there. Harps, you're stalking me on 3 platforms, Harp. Oh, that's funny. Possum King says the U.S. wants all its eggs in the BB basket. I think that's right. Well, not the U.S. people, not the United States, not us. Maybe Zog does. All right. I have my that's my chat shout out. You guys can, if you got anything in the chat, if you got a question and you want something to throw at me, I will go back and look at it periodically. So you're welcome to do that. Yeah, I mentioned this today. JP Morgan flagged $6,000 golden questions on Fed independence. So the Fed independence that we speak of is the push from the executive branch to weaken the dollar. So important to watch that battle play out. And not that I'm fooled by any of this. I think these are the same institutions. You had Janet Yellen was head of the Federal Reserve and then stepped down for Jerome Powell, and then she became the Treasury Secretary. And then she said we could fight, multiple wars at once and fund everything. And so, there's Janet Yellen for you. But they're the same entity for the most. I mean, these are the same, controlled by the same entities. They're just different outfits. It's like, Taco Bell competing against KFC when it's the same entity, same company. All right. Let's see. I saw this article, thought it was important, generationally, as we look at geopolitics. And then after this, I want to play that video by Greg Reese, something else to think about, because we've been talking about this for a while, but put this up on the screen. This is the future. And it's been a wilderness for those of us in, whether you want to call it conservative talk or you want to call it right wing or libertarian or whatever. It's been a wilderness for many years, but I think the younger generation is very skeptical about the narrative machine that has been the so-called right. And this is article, Natural News again, rising anti-Israel sentiment. Charlie Kirk's letter to Netanyahu exposes the battle for Gen Z's hearts and minds. Kirk, a prominent conservative activist, described himself as a surrogate for Israel in private correspondence with Benjamin Netanyahu. Kirk warned Netanyahu that Israel was losing the information war and needed to counter rising anti-Israel sentiment, especially among Gen Z. Netanyahu praised Kirk for his efforts to counter anti-Israel narratives and disagreed with claims that Israel was involved in his assassination. Yeah, we read that last week. Caitlin Johnston wondered, why do you keep bringing that up? The debate over Kirk's stance on Israel highlights ideological fractures within conservative ranks, with figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene increasingly critical of Israeli actions. The untimely death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk has stirred a wave of intense debate, particularly regarding his close ties with Israel and the Israeli government. In a May 2nd letter to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, now revealed, Kirk described himself as a surrogate for Israel, a revelation that sparked controversy and shed light on the complex relationship between an American's conservatism and Israeli interests. The case not only highlights the growing anti-Israel sentiment in the U.S., but also underscores a critical moment for conservative solidarity. Well, I just want to say there while I'm thinking of this too. The ops being run right now to make sure that everything is fractured is intense. And I see this a lot through influencers, and I won't name names, but I see people that will have some great stuff, maybe 70-80% of their clips, and I'll watch them and they'll say something great, and then they'll just throw in some racial thing. And I go, oh, there you are. Now I see what you are. You're taking some great points on traditionalism, on free markets, on liberty, on whatever it is, on, the American spirit, on building things. And you take that, and then you throw in some racial slurs and you go full tilt into that. That way, all of that stuff is ruined. I see exactly who you are. So I'm aware of it, and it is a fracturing that's going on. We didn't cause that, though. Those of us in the paleo conservatives, libertarians, the old traditional guys, we didn't cause this fracturing of things on the Zionism front. That was an implanted thing. This was, you got to remember, they called them the boat people. You think about the Cambodians or whatever, like refugees we bombed Cambodia and other places in the Vietnam War, and you had these boat people, or the refugees in South Vietnam. It goes back to that nomenclature. They called them the boat people of the McGovern era. So, George McGovern runs for president, loses to Richard Nixon in 1972. This is before the Watergate scandal broke open. But that's when the neocons flooded over into the from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And the hyper anti-Cold War got this weird amalgamation and hybrid of being pro-Zionist and pro-Israel. This is where and then they bring in from decades of the Schofield Bible and other things, they bring in the evangelicals and all the other stuff. And this makes this thing, where, if you're anti-Soviet Union, and remember, the reason that the neocons were anti-Soviet per se is not because they were anti-communists. It's because they didn't like the way Stalin ran things. They were Trotskyites. They believed in Leon Trotsky's vision of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, it was Irving Kristol, Bill Kristol's father, was the godfather of neoconservatism. This is a fact, and Bill Kristol was one of those figures for my lifetime in the 90s and early 2000s, was like the intellectual head of what they considered conservatism. But this was the roots of that was Marxism and the love of Leon Trotsky and revolution and that idea of liberating mankind. That's why you see so much stuff in the early 2000s with Bush, and it has to be with about democracy and democratizing mankind, and all of that stuff, and revolution, and those are very much neocon talking points. They don't believe in they're not Christians like that. They don't believe in peace or anything like what would be represented in the New Testament. It's not about that. It's about revolution, and that's why it's just this hijacking. I talk about it at length as anytime I do a show about them, but it really comes down to that. And there was, for the longest time, and that's why it was a road to nowhere. You really, how do you balance having a view on government spending? Let's say you're a fiscal hawk and you want to make sure the government doesn't spend too much, or you want to rein in spending or whatever, and you want to be responsible. How do you have that thought in your head, but also we have to go to war forever in the Middle East? We have to bomb all of these countries. We have to do 7 countries in 5 years. We have to spend trillions hunting down people that we once trained. We have to do this, or, like Lindsey Graham, he gets really precious about this stuff. They're going to kill us all. And he says that, by the way. You can go, he said that. I think he said that in a live debate about if we didn't put 200,000 troops in Syria. I've watched this stuff for years. So you can't have these two things don't go together, And so it's like you have this cognitive dissonance. You're fighting yourself if you even believe that. But a lot of the modern day, and when I ran for Congress and the things, like, people were so, like, they would feel it too. It's like, I'm supposed to believe in economic prosperity, but also wages should go down. It's like, I don't know. People would I'd talk about the trade deals being bad before Trump, by the way. This was before Trump, and this was 2013, 2014. And so I was a little bit ahead of my time, but I talked about all that stuff, and then talked about the Federal Reserve and everything else. And then our endless wars. I'm like, how do you have a conservative mindset, but you don't want to conserve? And to conserve would be, and we'll get to that here in a minute, because there's something really important I want to read on antiwar.com. But that's the crux of the matter. You get to this, and the psychotic break, I think, of what conservatism was supposed to be. And the younger generation sees it plainly, because if you used to, and I'm sure it's still this way now, but used to, I mean, when you become somewhat prominent in conservative media, by the way, they never even, I was never picked. I came up with a class of broadcasters that all went on to syndication, and good for them. And I went a different path because I never believed in any of that stuff. But the first thing they do, they fly you to Israel. You go to Israel, and that you have to wonder why that is. It's because, in my opinion, it has to do with the militaristic side of the United States, or those, hearth and home, and, sending Johnny off to war, all that stuff. Those come from more conservative Christian backgrounds. Doesn't have to necessarily be Christian, but more conservative, more right-leaning. That's more patriotic, more nationalistic. So they capture that, and then they say, well, if you really love your country, then you'll, have Israel's best interest at heart. It's very brilliant the way they are able to do that. And they just put those things together. And then over time, though, the ideas fail, because you can't be both. You can't put America first when you put Israel first. It just doesn't work. It's just, the Bible says that you can't serve two masters. You start serving two masters, you're just fractured. We really know. I mean, most of these politicians, we know exactly. I mean, when you look at a lawmaker and they've got an Israeli flag hanging in their office, it's like, that's bizarre, or the Florida congressman who showed up in an IDF uniform, to Congress. Like, who do you serve? These are interesting questions. And I think a lot of that's just making all this fall apart. Charlie Kirk, founding founder of Turning Point USA, was known for his passionate advocacy on college campuses. In his letter to Netanyahu, Kirk expressed his deep love for Israel and emphasized the need for Israel to address rising anti-Israel sentiment, particularly among Generation Z. He outlined 7 key strategies to counter misinformation and win the information war, including promotion of daily life in Israel and leveraging social media platforms like X. Kirk urged Netanyahu not to subcontract rhetorical defenses of American surrogates, but step up and take direct action. He said Israel's losing the information more and needs a communications intervention, Kirk wrote. Kirk was just a kid. He's only 31. And he's already once you start seeing things like this, like I think he was trying to figure out, how do I make this right? How do I get them to see Israel the way I see it? And then once you've seen something, you just can't unsee it, though. It grows on you. On September 10th, Charlie Kirk was assassinated during a speech at Utah Valley University, an event that shocked the nation and reignited debates about his ties to Israel. Netanyahu dismissed any claims of Israeli involvement in Kirk's assassination, calling it a monstrous big lie. Well, the mere fact that we've reached a point where that's even on the table, that shows how bad things have gone. Because like if you look at AIPAC, like I asked AIPAC, like why would you oppose a bill by Rand Paul? Like AIPAC was the number one opponent to a bill proposed by Rand Paul, which I thought was, okay, let's see where the chops are. Rand Paul, years ago, 2012 or so, put a bill forth and said, we stop all foreign aid to any country who burns the American flag. So like out in public, if you're having, rallies burning the American flag, then we don't send any more foreign aid to you. The number one opponent to that was Israel. It was AIPAC. And I asked them this in their meeting. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just be, it wasn't opposing foreign aid. They were just, they opposed any lessening of any foreign aid because it would start, I imagine it would start a foreign aid conversation or what's necessary. The assassination of Charlie Kirk not only spotlighted his relationship with Israel, but also illuminated the widening ideological rifts with American conservatism. Figures like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene have shared their views on Kirk's relationship with Israel, some acknowledging his criticism of Netanyahu's policies, while others emphasized his dedication to the Jewish state. The internal debate underscores the challenges faced by conservative leaders in balancing support for Israel and the emerging anti-Israel sentiment among younger generations. The case of Charlie Kirk serves as a critical reminder of the delicate balance between ideological dedication and public perception. Well, he was on the cusp of realizing some things if he really dug deep. And what it comes down to is independence and sovereignty, and what is a nation state, and how much foreign influence can we tolerate, all the rest of that inside of our politics. Because it doesn't serve American interests. The Iraq War didn't serve America's interests. It's good for Israel. You dismantle a government, topple a regime, and that, just like in 1983 or so, I believe it was 1983, the Israeli government flew F-16s over and bombed Osirak, which was the Iraqi nuclear power plant the French were helping them build. And the Israelis just bombed it, just unilaterally blew it up. And the reason they did that is they didn't want any sort of nuclear power rival in their region, so they just took it into their own hands and blew it up. And you can say, well, they're defending themselves. Well, Israel has 300 nuclear weapons. They're not on the books. It's one of the reasons JFK hit the roof when he found out they were using our uranium, and they were creating nuclear proliferation, which he was against because he was a man of peace. But they have 300 atomic weapons, and we act like, the lessons of any war like the Iraq War or Syria or Libya is that if you don't have nuclear weapons, you better get them because we'll invade you. We don't respect your sovereignty. That's what that was about. But it didn't serve any American interest, like at all. Actually, it's the opposite. It was a looting of the treasury. It accelerated the moral decay of the United States of America, our credibility, our standing, our fiscal house. Everything was just a terrible, evil thing to do. If you look at it in retrospect, I mean, I looked at it in real time, by the way. I thought it was a really stupid. Anybody who knows me knew that. I was part of the invasion of Iraq, so I know all about it. And that was a really dark time. But, those things were great for Israel. I mean, even Netanyahu, you can go look this quote up. He said 9/11 was great for Israel. And you can go into the whole dancing Israelis. You could go into who is Lucky Larry, who's friends with Netanyahu, or all that stuff, all the connections, all the strangeness. And you can go into that. But at the end of the day, it's just about what's, having a country, this foreign influence is so destructive because, Israel has a right to do whatever it's going to do to promote itself and its own interests and everything else. And then we have a right to go, well, that's BS and I'm not doing that. And that doesn't mean you're anti-Semitic. It means that I'm not going to be controlled by a nation state that's not mine, that I don't have any say in, that, is a Rothschild created entity with the Balfour Declaration. I mean, I'm not going to go into all that, but I think it's impossible to have conservatism exist in the same space because that's more, again, these are the McGovern boat people, the neocons, and the rampant, Zionism. That comes out of the left, and that comes out of a revolution and all the other stuff that, is basically Trotsky. So you're not going to have this. And of course you have to deal with which is waning, by the way, the idolatry of the evangelicals. That's, I grew up with that. But how many souls were lost from Christianity? How many people would have come to know Christ had it not been for all this warmongering and stuff? That's really a turnoff. When I put this idolatry on a nation state that I've read the Bible and I read it every day. I'd have really the argument that we exist solely to promote the state of Israel as Christians is such nonsense and something I disagree with instinctively before I even knew that could intellectually back it up. Just thought it was a really dumb idea. All right. We got about 15 minutes left. Let me switch gears a little bit. I want to play this video by Greg Reese, though. Very important, coming off the heels of the Charlie Kirk assassination, and something I think is the strangeness, the high strangeness around it. We got into that a little bit, but let's go into this. All right, this is it's over on Activist Post. Let's see if I can let me pull it up first, and then I'll share the screen. Digital Dementio face says, "Oh, I hope you're having a great day. Can't believe silver hit 47. I know, and it's going to continue to do that crazy stuff." All right, let's go to. This is Greg Reese Substack via Activist Post. One second, I need to put it. It just started automatically playing. This is what happens when you're your own producer. I'm not going to bother Beans though. She's taking a nap. All right, let's. I want to put this video by Greg Reese. Really great piece. Let me play this. One second. I don't know why it's taking me. Well, let's see if I can get it to go, folks. I really am trying.
Right after the Charlie Kirk shooting, an elderly George Zinn started shouting that he was the shooter and later told police that he did so in order to distract them from the real shooter. This is the same George Zinn who was featured in a 9/11 memorial video, even though he wasn't there and didn't know anyone who was.
We did have some idea, there was something going on because we dealt with Bin Laden before in separate instances. So we did suspect that it was Al-Qaeda involved in that. Basically that's my experience with what I went through with 9/11. I really didn't have anybody I knew that was up there. But somebody said that they haven't seen that kind of unity in the country since Pearl Harbor in 1941, when we were brought together and that kind of thing. And anyway, God bless America. It was I can't say it's a great experience. It was a experience I'll always remember. And that's kind of my story as far as where I was.
The same George Zinn who was arrested in 2013, less than a week after the Boston Marathon bombing, for emailing the Salt Lake City Marathon about placing bombs at the finish line. George Zinn has a history of working for the GOP as an agitator and has just been brought up on child porn charges. Charlie Kirk's assassination was on September 10th. A man named Tyler was arrested as the suspected shooter. The opening scene of the 1998 film Snake Eyes takes place on September 10th at a sports arena where a boxer named Tyler is fighting. Tyler's nickname is the Executioner. During the fight, a man named Charles Kirkland is shot in the neck.
My lucky number. What?
"2025 is the year of the snake, and the public is being distracted and put under a spell."
Charlie's angry. Look at that. He's angry at me now.
Should I just kill him?
I hate my opponent.
And the men consumed with resentment, anger, and hate.
I hate my opponent.
I know that because I've got a little hate compartment in my heart.
Working full-time to cast the spell and divide the masses, the mainstream media works the left-wing cult, and the alternative media works the right-wing cult. Solving the riddle of the Charlie Kirk psyop will do nothing to stop the genocide of the Palestinian people, which is an extremely important agenda for the U.S. government. And solving the riddle of the Charlie Kirk psyop will do nothing to stop the fast approaching digital ID carbon tax surveillance system, which is the main agenda in all of this chaos. And the AI control grid comes with AI medical care for all. You might not get Tylenol, but you will get your very own customized gene editing shot, and it will be based on your digital profile. Rather than being distracted by spells, now would be a good time to make final preparations for the imminent collapse of the US dollar and to build something of your own for the future. Those who are mentally, spiritually, and physically prepared will undoubtedly fare the best. Greg Reese reporting.
Nice little warning there at the end. And it's so true. I thought even just, you can put the reference in the esoteric stuff, and there's a question mark that hangs over that for me. I definitely see it. I'm not sure what kind of pattern it represents or what it's meant to tell us, but it is all of it's a magic trick, right? And you get into your cults, which I like that description. You get into your left-wing cult or your right-wing cult because you're comfortable there. I know this narrative. You're being fed it like a news feed, and that's why I always tell people, don't listen to me. Go find it for yourself. I don't want to build a cult. I don't want to build that following. I want you, if you're listening to me, get something of relevance from it. If you get something from the show, maybe it's from the chaos of my mind of what I've read over the past 40 years or whatever. Take something from it, but find out for yourself and don't get caught up in this, because that's exactly what's happening. There's and that you'll never fully escape it. Because everything casts a spell. You're under, some sort of mind control to I got to get up. I got to pay all these bills. I have to work. I have to do all. Yes, you do on so many levels. Maybe it's not as much as we think we do, but we're under that. And the illusion of so much of it. It's like, well, this person's on my side. You know, it's like what I was telling you earlier. I see it now, and maybe you'll start to see it too, where you see these influencers and I see these people and they're raking in all this ad money and all this stuff. And then they'll say 80% of stuff and it's awesome. And then I'll look over and there'll be like one of these racist hacks in my chat, you know, on Saturday where I'm going, oh, I see what you are. You know, nice to meet you, officer. Did you go to Quantico? You know, I see these people and I know exactly what it's. You take great ideas and then you destroy them by adding in your nonsense, whether you believe it or not. And I see you from a mile away. And I'm not going to engage with any of that stuff. You know, like if you're in my chat, you want to say something racist or you want to say something provocative, whatever, just I'm going to ban you. I don't care. I don't need you to look at my stuff. I would just talk to myself probably. if it's just me and Beans, I'd probably do the show for an archive. When I started, I'm like 518 episodes in or whatever we are. And I started episode 1 of the relaunch of my radio show. I'm like, I'm leaving this for my son so he can go back and, you know, listen to Dad for years and see what I learned through how many episodes. So we'll see how many I can get out there. But it is important not to be caught up in that fulcrum of the mind war, folks. All right, let me go to the last article of the day. Really important. This is antiwar.com. Let's go down the list. Is it still? I still have it. Oh, I have so many tabs open. I have to. There we go. It's the last tab. Antiwar.com. War Chief Hegseth says U.S. military is done with politically correct rules of engagement. U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth said in an address to hundreds of generals and admirals on Tuesday that there should be no more, quote, politically correct rules of engagement for the U.S. military as he presented his recently rebranded Department of War as a ruthless force that can produce overwhelming violence. We're training warriors, not defenders. We fight wars to win, not to defend. Defense is something you do all the time. It's inherently reactionary and can lead to overreach and mission creep. War is something you do sparingly, Hegseth told the crowd of senior officers in Quantico. On our own terms and with clear aims, we fight to win. We unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters. Well, Pete, I got a great strategy for you. It'll work every time. Just don't do that. Don't go over there. Don't get the anthem going over there. Send the boys. Don't do that. Because there's nothing over there. It's just, even, there was a moment of lucidity in the Trump brain back in 2019 or so. He's like, it's just serious, just sand and death. I remember that. I was hosting InfoWars and I go, that's a great quote. It's just sand and death. So maybe not do all of that. The enemies of this country are here. They run stuff. They're the people that left the border open. They're the governors and people that leave the border open now, and they have the authority to close it and allow U.S. citizens to be raped and murdered or bring in giant truckloads of whatever to poison people. I mean, that's hard for the Chinese to do that. They're not in charge. It's hard for the Russians to do that. They're not in charge. And the Russians never sent me into a no-win meat grinder war for nothing. That's not my enemy. They certainly didn't bankrupt me. They didn't bankrupt the dollar. They didn't do that. They didn't put a Patriot Act in place so that you're surveilled and all of your data is stored underground in giant cavernous dumbs of the deep underground military bases with all the servers and stuff. They didn't do that. No foreign nation did. They certainly don't allow, I mean, if you want to talk about war fighting, and there's a time and place for that. But we definitely haven't done that in a while. And the the history of the Department of War, that was changed by Truman. Truman changed it because it was a cataclysmic thing. I mean, we unleashed the power of the sun and dropped it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nagasaki, by the way, was the largest concentration of Christians in Japan. And my friend James Perloff thinks that was no accident, that they actually used and dropped it on Christians. Just a little side note. You can look that up for another thing you can look up for yourself. But that was the case. And Truman, for all his faults, he was a man of peace in some way. I mean, he really didn't believe, he wasn't like bloodthirsty. And so he thought the Department of Defense was a better fit after being the Department of War. And then he also changed, this is something they didn't include in any of these little revisions, but I remember this from reading a book. Imagine that, on my way to invade a country. And this was a David McCullough's biography of Truman, but it's talked about how Truman also changed the presidential seal. And he had the eagle used to look towards the arrows, and he had the eagle's face and beak towards the olive branch. So just something a little, I'm not opposed to renaming something, because that sounds like, the War Department, that's where war is. I get that. But this whole, I also agree with some of the things we need to like un-PC the military, but what wars do we need to fight? Has anybody asked that lately? What war, like Venezuela, is that a war we need to fight? What wars do we need to fight? Did our forefathers and did our ancestors and did our predecessors, did they not earn us an equity of peace? Do we have to throw it away every time? I mean, it was 50 years of Cold War. Do we not have a peace dividend? Why didn't we use it? Is it because we have to have constant, never-ending, perpetual war for perpetual peace? The article goes on, says, after Trump came into office at the beginning of the year, he eased restrictions on U.S. airstrikes and raids, giving lower-level military commanders more freedom of action. As a result of the policy, the U.S. has launched a record number of airstrikes in Somalia this year. Because, if we're not in Somalia, folks, how are we ever going to defend the United States of America? The Trump administration also conducted a brutal bombing campaign in Yemen, which Hegseth dubbed Operation Rough Rider, from March 15th to May 6th, that involved strikes on residential buildings and energy infrastructure and migrant detention facilities. Elsewhere in his speech on Tuesday, Hegseth said his message to U.S. enemies was FAFO, a slang term for that stands for F around and find out. Well, I wish we had more time. But I think you get the essence of what I'm trying to say. You can always just not do that. We could actually rebuild the republic, which is a great idea, and, have a border and not a new world order. We could work on individual liberty. We could work on free markets. We could work on deregulation. We could work on decentralization. We work on all that. We've had a peace dividend. This 20th century was a slaughter pen. It was a meat grinder, and it was awful. It was bankers' wars. And if we got anything from that, can we have a peace dividend? Can't we just tell the stories and really do history and show what happened and not do that again? Well, maybe Plato was right, that only the dead have seen the end of war. Perhaps Plato, by the way, means broad shoulders. He was a wrestler. I don't make this stuff up. All right, folks, we appreciate you. Wolfpack.gold, precious metal subscriptions. If you'd bought in 2022, 2023, 2024, you're welcome. It's doing, your portfolio of physical metals is doing pretty good. You're very welcome, and I'm proud of it. Wise Wolf Gold and Silver, anything you need, precious metals, direct order, IRA rollovers, 401ks, all that good stuff. I'll plug more next week. Promo code 1776 on any of that stuff, and I will put some free silver in your package. So let us know if you need any help with that. From Beans the Brave and the crew and myself, everybody here, Wise Wolf, you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you Saturday over on America Unplugged. End of transmission.